Hello, this is Unsung with GameLeap, and in today's video, we're going to be going over the Dev 2024 item change article that Riot has just released. It is really refreshing to see an article of this quality. This game designer actually knows what they're talking about instead of just spewing random gaming jargon. Let's go ahead and break down why this article is so good, starting off with the item power budget section. Since Riot has added mythics to League, they've been unhappy with how items ended up being a larger percentage of the overall power budget than desired and overrode champions' core gameplay. They're looking to fix this by going back and allowing champions to once again fulfill their fantasies. This is important to Riot because champions are a richer, more compelling, and more immersive way to deliver gameplay fantasies and experiences than items are, which is 100% true. What is interesting about this article so far is that a lot of the push for mythics was that it would expand upon a champion's previous gameplay fantasy. If you've been around for a while, then you know exactly how the community reacted to mythics. Nobody liked them on release, people said that they were shoehorned into building a certain item, which was 100% true, but Riot ended up defending this, stating that mythics did bring more build diversity. Now that we've been down the road, we know that this was not true at all and that Riot was wrong. Riot changing their stance on this and acknowledging that they were wrong is a huge step in the right direction. In the article, they double down on wanting people to experience the game through their champion instead of through items. A great example of this is the recent abuse of Duskblade. If your champion was capable of building Duskblade when it was overpowered, your champion was usually pretty strong. If they weren't able to build Duskblade, then they were left behind in the meta. This meant that your champion's kit didn't matter as much if it was unable to abuse Duskblade properly. Let's get one thing straight before we continue on in this article. There will always be an item that is superior. No matter where we've been in League's lifespan, there has always been an item that is outright broken on a certain patch. That being said, normally champions that don't build the item will still be viable during that patch. That has been less and less of the case recently, which is what Riot is trying to fix. Across the board, Riot is reducing the power of items to target relatively close to their power levels before the mythic system was introduced. Essentially, they're reverting the game to around Season 9. Previously, they have limited the systemic creep of non-champion power through things like the 12.10 durability update or the 13.20 rune nerfs, but they're looking to address one of the primary sources of excessive snowballing through items. Items are the primary way that you translate your gold into power, and as items have grown more powerful over time, they've made gold worth more than it was worth in previous iterations of the game. This is such a refreshing take to see from a Riot game designer, because time after time, the Riot has gone against the community saying that this isn't the case. All it takes is one look at the stat line of a mythic item to tell you that this item is worth substantially more than other items. It gives you the mythic passive, it gives you a unique passive of some sort, sometimes some sort of active, or some sort of unique passive that functions almost similarly to an active that gives you a huge amount of damage. It's very hard to place a gold value on something like the Luden's passive because it is just so strong in what it does. This is beautifully expressed here and one of the only acknowledgements that we've ever had that the mythics are by themselves problematic. If you ever want to learn more about the mages mentioned in this video, make sure that you head on over to GameLeap.com where we have courses with the best tips and tricks to help you get on Summoner's Rift as quickly as possible. Let's look at Divine Sunderer real quick. We can't really put a value on the heal that it grants us because it's so valuable against tanks. If your champion is capable of building Divine Sunder into tanks, those tanks are not allowed to play the game. However, if your champion cannot build Divine Sunder into a tank, they have a much harder time playing into them. The only exception to this is like Jace, who goes Eclipse. This places the game in this weird area of power creep, where the items are so polarizing that we can't really lock in an entire cast of champions blindly because we risk getting counterpicked by something that goes Divine Sunder. Divine Sunder isn't a counter item, it is a neutralization item that removes an entire cast of champions. In order to compete with an item like Divine Sunder, all of the tanks items in Modern League are completely overtuned. Right now, tanks have never been tankier, and they've also never dealt so much damage just from the item effects. This is not healthy nor good for the balance of League as a whole. Previously, if we played a fighter into a tank, it would be a harder matchup, but you'd still be able to win it, and then you'd be able to outscale them by reaching your items beforehand. Now you buy Divine Sunder, and those tanks no longer exist to you. You use them like a heal battery. Tanks, on the other hand, against non-Divine Sunder users, outscale basically everything. They are menaces in the late game, which is not the case before. Back to the article, Riot states that they've added a lot of different gold into the game. Rift Herald, Tower Plates, Bounties, and so on. This accelerates the pace in which you obtain these broken items, which then shift your playstyle completely. Instead of items shifting your playstyle completely, Riot wants it to feel like an upgrade to your kit instead of it being your entire kit. To quote the article, for example, they're moving Liandry's back into being a high uptime caster item where it is more clearly at its best when the user is dealing damage to their targets over a long period of time. This is in contrast to the new item, Storm Surge, which is the opposite. It's designed to synergize the gameplay patterns that concentrate their burst into a narrow window. If you didn't already know, currently on League, Liandry's is the highest damage mage item in the game if you don't outright one combo somebody, and even if you do, sometimes it is. Liandry's has always been designed for shredding tanks, but with the amount of stats on it, it is really good at killing squishies too. This means that the choices between Liandry's and Luden's is a lot more homogenous. We only want to go Luden's in fringe cases where we're like solo AP on our team and we're playing a burst mage, whereas before, we'd only want to go Liandry's and the enemy team has a lot of HP HP stackers. Now the choices aren't so clear because Liandry's does as much damage as Luden's does, but it's more consistent, so we don't have to opt into that one singular playstyle. Storm Surge is a lot more rewarding for burst champions. It gives you movement speed and it gives you burst, which is what your kit already does. Now we won't have to worry so much about going Liandry's because Liandry's isn't made for those types of champions. We can still buy it as a situational item into these tanks and not have to worry about it, but we can also opt into Storm Surge at the same time, which gives us more flexibility and the ability to play around our kit, which is what League has always been about. Let's go ahead and move on to the next topic of the article, which is going to be AP itemization. Riot acknowledges that mage itemization is at an all-time low in terms of satisfaction. Mage items just simply are not that exciting and they don't really do cool things. They're just stat balls. Because of this, Riot has identified two key areas that they believe will help improve the AP system, particularly for the mage class as a whole. These two areas are locked slots and pattern binding. So what exactly is a locked slot? Well, if you play mages, there's usually 4 of them. We have our mana item, we have Zhonya's Hourglass, we have Void Staff, and we have Death Cap. If we include our boots, then that is 5 locked slots. These are items that are going to be strong on essentially every single mage champion, and there's not very much deviation here. You're always going to need mana, you're always going to need Void Staff for late game penetration. Zhonya's is of course the strongest item in the game when used correctly, and then Death Cap is the best amount of mage stats that we can get. So this only leaves us with one real flexible slot. In the article, they state that the Mythic system improved this in a few ways for mages by adding some competition among mana items, which is true to an extent. At the end of the day, the necessity of a mana item is a lock slot in and of itself. They're also trying to alleviate the issue that Void Staff has by introducing Crypt Bloom as an alternative percentage penetration option for mages and other AP champs. This slot is still effectively locked like the mana items, but there's a little bit more variety here, so we can choose to have some actual diversity. They experimented with a similar change to Death Cap, but people just preferred the raw stats of Death Cap because it once again gives you the percentage multiplier of AP, which is super valuable. They've also pulled a lot of the stats from Zhonya's Hourglass as a whole, making it not so much as a must-buy, but an item that is a great luxury item. It's something that you want to buy when it really synergizes with your kit and you absolutely need it to function. With the cool and new powerful effects that we have on AP items, items like Hourglass aren't always going to be needed, which is great because it frees up one of those lock slots that we talked about before. Now on to pattern binding. In the current item system, an item that is pattern bound enhances how a champion accomplishes their goals throughout the entire game. Something that is output bound, on the other hand, instead supports these goals directly. They use mythics like Everfrost as an example here. Everfrost replaced or subverted intended gameplay on champion kits. For example, Ahri using Everfrost to guarantee that charm hits, which made them an output-bound item that shortcuts the intended champion's pattern. Dear Lord, I love this writer. This guy is actually so correct in every single one of the observations that he's made. Champions like Ahri are intended to be high reward when you actually land the charm. The counterplay to the charm is that the charm is hard to hit. You can always sidestep it. Everfrost kind of trivializes this. Because it's such a wide AoE that also applies the slow, you can miss the Everfrost route and still land the slow, which makes the charm substantially easier to hit. A champion like Ahri shouldn't have a soft CC landing into her hard CC. As a result, Ahri is left in a state where she can't really assassinate people, but she is a great pick champion due to how easy it is to land the pick. In this situation, Riot's hands are tied. They can't remove Everfrost outright because it hurts the mythic diversity as a whole, but they also can't buff Ahri because she's so tied to Everfrost. As a result of mythics like this being removed, there's more balanced space for them to actually adjust the champion and make the champion more rewarding to play, instead of playing it just as an Everfrost into the charm delivery system. In the article, they talk about the AP itemization pool, how it affects champions, and basically what we just went over. I'm not going to double state this. In order to create more diversity around AP builds, however, they're constricting some items just a tad, so there's more diversity. The Season 13 version of Shadowflame is really good on every single damage dealer. This is bad for the game's health overall. So what Riot is doing to fix this is making Shadowflame more bound to the burst damage champions. It's going to be a lot better if you want to one-rotate people with the critical strike that it grants. Items should feel like a good power spike, but they shouldn't be too restrictive, and Riot is heading in a fantastic direction with all of these changes. Next up in the article is changes to the support item as a whole. First up, there are some problems with support. It's an integral role for every team, but it's lower agency, which is kind of true in lower elo, and it's also not fun to play, which is 100% true. Riot is focusing on increasing the satisfaction and creating unique power for the class without disrupting the role of the identity. They still want support to be a support instead of a second carry. To do this, they're looking at the support quest items, which will then allow them to introduce power across all support champions, especially in the early to mid game, without making items that can be poached by other casts of champions. So, like a mid laner taking Umbral Glaive, for example. In order to achieve this goal, they've created items that you can upgrade after completing your support quest. They acknowledge that ranged champions have an easier time completing the quest, but it should balance out in the end. Overall, in my opinion, the support quest item changes have been nice for the health of bot lane. Every champion can do something to some extent and be useful at it, instead of being completely useless in a certain regard. These changes in this article have been a breath of fresh air for League players that are winded, such as myself. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, but as always, thank you all for watching and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video.